She stood there in a simple black dress while diamonds glittered around her like stars mocking the moon. The bride's mother whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did she come straight from the kitchen?" The guests laughed, their champagne glasses catching the golden light. Maya felt every stare, every sneer, but she held her ground beside billionaire Daniel Whitmore. To them, she was just another nobody who got lucky. But when the groom suddenly stopped mid-vow, walked past his bride, and dropped to his knees before Maya, the ballroom fell silent. He looked up at her with tears streaming down his face and said, "You saved my life, boss." 3 words that shattered every cruel smile in the room. The woman they mocked for her simplicity was the invisible titan who held their futures in her hands. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because true power doesn't need to announce itself. The bookstore was Maya's church, floor-to-ceiling shelves of worn paperbacks, the musty smell of old pages, and a corner window seat that caught the afternoon light just right. This was her sanctuary, a place where she could be nobody and everybody at once. No boardrooms, no billion-dollar decisions, no cameras, just her, a cup of black coffee, and the quiet hum of turning pages. Daniel Whitmore found her there 6 months ago, completely by accident. He ducked inside to escape a sudden rainstorm and found himself transfixed by a woman in a faded Columbia University sweater, completely absorbed in a book about post-colonial African economics. When she looked up and smiled at him, he forgot he was supposed to be at a shareholders' meeting. Their love story unfolded in the spaces between words, long conversations about philosophy and art, walks through the city where Maya showed him hole-in-the-wall restaurants he'd never noticed, despite living there his whole life. With her, Daniel wasn't heir to the Whitmore fortune. He was just a man learning to see the world through different eyes. She never asked about his money, never wanted to attend galas or charity balls. When he offered to take her to Paris, she suggested a road trip to visit small black-owned bookstores across the South instead. It was the best 2 weeks of his life. But the real world has a way of crashing through even the strongest doors. The call came on a quiet Sunday morning as they sat in Maya's small apartment, sunlight streaming through sheer curtains. Daniel's phone buzzed insistently. His mother's name flashed across the screen. He hesitated, then answered. "Daniel, darling, I need you to come to brunch today. Your sister has news." Catherine Whitmore's voice was crisp, commanding, allowing no room for refusal. "Mother, bring your friend if you must. We should meet her properly." The line went dead before he could respond. Daniel looked at Maya, apology already written across his face. She simply squeezed his hand. "It's all right," she said softly. "I always knew we'd have to face them eventually." The Whitmore estate loomed like a marble fortress against the manicured landscape. As they pulled through the iron gates, Maya felt the familiar weight settling on her shoulders, the same crushing pressure she'd fled 3 years ago when she walked away from her empire. The brunch was set on the terrace, a tableau of white linen and crystal that caught the light like calculated displays of wealth. Catherine Whitmore sat at the head of the table, every silver hair perfectly in place, her smile sharp as cut glass. Beside her, Daniel's sister Victoria practically vibrated with excitement. "Daniel!" Victoria sang out. "You're here! And you brought—" Her eyes swept over Maya with theatrical confusion. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name?" "Maya," she replied evenly, extending her hand. Victoria's handshake was limp, dismissive. "How lovely! Daniel's told us absolutely nothing about you. What is it that you do?" "I read a lot," Maya said with a small smile, a brittle laugh from Catherine. "How charming. Daniel, darling, sit here. Maya, you can sit down there." She gestured vaguely toward the far end of the table. A seat positioned just slightly apart from the family circle. The placement was deliberate, a statement. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mother!" "It's fine," Maya interrupted gently, taking the assigned seat. She had fought bigger battles than this. She could endure a brunch. Victoria launched into her announcement. She was getting married to Marcus Chen, a tech entrepreneur whose company had just gone public. The wedding would be the event of the season. 600 guests, designer everything, coverage in all the right magazines. "It's going to be absolutely perfect," Victoria gushed. "Only the best people, of course." Catherine's eyes slid to Maya, a razor-thin assessment. "Family is so important at these occasions. People who understand our world." The implication hung in the air like poison. Throughout the meal, the small cuts continued. Questions about Maya's family that assumed dysfunction, compliments on her exotic features, surprise that she went to Colombia. "You must be very talented." When dessert arrived, Catherine leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maya, dear, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but have you given any thought to what you'll wear to the wedding? These events have a certain standard." Maya met her gaze steadily. "I'm sure I'll find something appropriate." Of course. I'm just saying, if you need any guidance..." The sentence trailed off, the insult complete. That evening, Maya's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Hi, Victoria here. Got your number from Daniel. So excited you're coming to the wedding. I know our events can be a bit formal, so I wanted to share some boutique links. These are what my friends and I adore, just so you feel comfortable and don't feel out of place. Hope this helps." Below were links to Chanel, Valentino, Givenchy. Each dress cost more than most people earned in a year. Maya read the message twice, parsing the subtext with surgical precision. "So you don't feel out of place." Translation: "You don't belong. Here's the costume you need to wear to pretend you do." The words were a masterclass in passive aggression, a perfect microaggression veiled as a helping hand. The implication was clear. You are out of place. You do not belong. Here is the uniform you must wear to be granted temporary admission. A bitter taste filled her mouth, but the emotion that followed wasn't anger. It was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She had built this quiet life precisely to escape these games. These shallow, cruel methods of establishing hierarchy. With steady fingers, she typed her reply, choosing her words as deliberately as a chess player. "Thank you for your thoughtfulness, Victoria. I have my own style, but I will certainly keep your suggestions in mind. Looking forward to celebrating with you." It was polite. It was dismissive. And it drew a line in the sand without handing Victoria the satisfaction of a fight. When she showed Daniel the message later that evening, his face darkened instantly. The easy smile he reserved only for her vanished, replaced by a thunderous scowl. "She did what?" he seethed, snatching the phone from her hand as if the screen itself had insulted him. He read the words, and a muscle in his jaw began to twitch. "I can't believe her." Before Maya could say a word, he was on his feet, pacing the length of her small living room and dialing his sister's number. He turned away, but his voice, sharp with fury, filled the quiet apartment. "Victoria, what the hell was that message you sent Maya?" Maya closed her eyes, listening to the muffled, indignant squawk from the other end of the line. Daniel's voice rose to cut it off. "Don't you dare tell me you were just trying to help. What were you trying to help with? Did you think she doesn't know how to dress herself? It was condescending, and it was insulting." There was another pause, and this time Maya could almost hear the venom in his sister's reply as Daniel's face grew even tighter. "Embarrass the family?" he exploded, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Are you listening to yourself? Maya could never embarrass me. But you, Victoria, right now, you are embarrassing me profoundly." The call ended abruptly, Daniel hanging up with a final furious jab of his thumb. He turned back to Maya, his anger immediately dissolving into a look of deep regret. "I am so sorry, Em," he said, running a hand through his hair. He sank onto the sofa beside her, his shoulders slumped. "My sister. She's just shallow. That's all it is. There's no depth to her, so she judges everything by its surface. Please don't let it get to you. He meant it to be comforting, a dismissal of his sister's power. But the words landed like small, sharp stones, shallow. He saw it as a simple character flaw, a personal failing. He didn't see it for what it was, a calculated act of exclusion, a tool of a class system designed to keep people like her out. He loved her. She knew that without a doubt. But in that moment, she felt an immense gulf between them, the chasm of his privilege. He could see the injury, but he couldn't possibly understand the nature of the weapon that had inflicted it. Later that night, Maya stood before her closet. The doors were open, revealing rows of simple, elegant pieces in muted colors. But at the very back, shrouded in garment bags, were the ghosts of a different life. She unzipped one, revealing the shimmering silk of a designer gown, a relic from a time when her name commanded boardrooms and her face graced magazine covers. She could wear it. She could walk into that wedding clad in the very armor Victoria worshipped, beat her at her own game. The thought was tempting, a brief flash of vengeful satisfaction, but she pushed it away. To do so would be to accept the terms of their battle. To admit their rules had power over her. She zipped the bag closed, pushing the ghost back into the darkness. Instead, her fingers settled on a simple black dress. It had no famous label, no extravagant design. It was just a sheath of perfect fabric, cut with an understated elegance that relied on nothing but the form of the woman wearing it. It was a quiet choice, a silent declaration. She would not change herself to please them. She would not hide, but she would not perform either. She would simply be herself, and let that be enough. The Whitmore Grand Hotel was less a building and more a declaration of dynastic power. From the moment they stepped out of the car and into the gilded lobby, Maya felt the air shift, growing thinner and colder, charged with a specific kind of pressure she knew all too well. It was the atmosphere of a place where everyone was watching, weighing, and valuing everyone else. The soft strains of a chamber orchestra were drowned out by a low, persistent hum of whispers that seemed to follow them as they walked across the marble floor. Dozens of pairs of eyes peeking over the rims of champagne flutes slid towards them, and Maya felt the familiar sensation of being catalogued. It wasn't friendly curiosity. It was appraisal, a silent audit of her dress, her posture, her very presence beside Daniel Whitmore. She felt Daniel's hand tighten around hers, a protective gesture that was also a confession of his own anxiety. He was back in his native habitat, and it was a jungle. They hadn't taken 10 steps before two figures detached from a cluster of guests and glided towards them. Catherine Whitmore was immaculate. A sculpture of ice and diamonds, her smile a perfect frozen curve. Beside her, Victoria was a vision in pre-wedding white, though her own smile was brittle, stretched thin across her face. Catherine's gaze swept over Maya in a fraction of a second, a dismissal so swift and complete it was more insulting than a glare. Her eyes landed on her son, and her smile thawed by a single proprietary degree. "Daniel, darling, you're late." "Mother," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You remember Maya?" Catherine's eyes flickered back to Maya, a flicker of polite acknowledgement that held no warmth. "Of course." The word was clipped, final. Victoria stepped forward, her laughter as artificial as the hothouse orchids spilling from giant urns. "Oh, Daniel, you finally brought your friend." Her eyes performed a slow, deliberate crawl down Maya's simple black dress, a look of theatrical pity dawning on her face. "Maya, that dress is so minimalist, very brave." The insult was perfectly delivered, a poisoned dart disguised as a fashion compliment. Before Maya could even register the sting, an older woman with a face like a powdered hawk joined them, her eyes fixed on Maya with unnerving intensity. She leaned towards Catherine, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "My, her skin is quite dark, isn't it? Very different." Victoria's smile widened, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She patted the woman's arm conspiratorially. "Oh, you know, Aunt Constance, it's all about those exotic looks these days. So uniquely beautiful." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Different. Exotic. They were the polite society synonyms for other. Maya felt a surge of heat rise in her chest, the familiar burn of fury. Beside her, Daniel went rigid, his knuckles white as he clenched his fist. A low growl rumbled in his throat. "That's enough," he started, his voice shaking with rage. He was seconds away from unleashing, but then he felt a gentle pressure on his arm. Maya's hand was there, her touch light but firm, a silent command. He looked down at her, confused, but she wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed, calm and direct, on Victoria and the aunt. When she spoke, her voice was perfectly level, carrying a quiet authority that cut through the tension like a blade. She offered them a small, serene smile. "Thank you for the compliment," she said, her eyes meeting Victoria's without a hint of fear. She then turned the same placid gaze to the older woman. "I've always taken great pride in my heritage." The effect was instantaneous. Their smirks faltered, their attack neutralized by an opponent who refused to play the victim. They had thrown their sharpest stones, and she had simply caught them, refusing to show even a scratch. They were left speechless, their venom rendered impotent by her unassailable dignity. The aunt coughed and mumbled something about needing a drink, quickly melting back into the crowd. Victoria's face was a mask of stunned disbelief, her planned victory having dissolved into an awkward silence. Though she had won the exchange, a profound sense of isolation washed over Maya. She could feel the stares of the surrounding guests, their whispers now laced with a new kind of intrigue. She was an exhibit, a spectacle. Daniel squeezed her hand, his helplessness a palpable current between them. He had brought her here into this gilded cage, promising to protect her. But now they were both trapped, caught in the cold, glittering web of his world, and she was utterly, completely alone. The ceremony began, and with it a fresh, deliberate act of exclusion. An usher with a practiced, impersonal smile led Maya and Daniel not to the rows reserved for family, but to a section much farther back, a sort of polished no-man's land populated by business associates and distant connections. The placement was a clear, unspoken statement. "You are guests, but you are not us." Maya settled into the plush chair, a strange sense of calm descending upon her. From this distance, she was no longer a participant, but an anthropologist observing a foreign ritual. She watched the sea of elegantly dressed guests, their faces composed in masks of polite reverence, and saw not a celebration of love, but a grand theatrical merger of two powerful families. It was all so beautifully choreographed, so perfectly artificial. Daniel sat beside her, rigid and silent, radiating a misery that was almost a physical force. Then the groom appeared at the altar. Marcus Chen was exactly as handsome as one would expect, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, his hair impeccably styled. Yet beneath the polished exterior, something was amiss. A subtle tension coiled in his shoulders, and his eyes, instead of looking forward with joyous anticipation, kept flicking nervously across the assembled crowd. He looked less like a man about to marry the love of his life, and more like someone searching for something he'd lost. The music swelled. The heavy doors at the back of the ballroom swung open, and Victoria began her procession, a cloud of white silk and smug satisfaction. Marcus turned, and a smile stretched across his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a well-rehearsed expression, a photograph of happiness rather than the real thing. As Victoria glided down the aisle, his gaze, which should have been locked on her, began to drift. It was a subconscious act, a restless search across the faces of the assembled guests. Maya watched him, a flicker of detached curiosity stirring within her. It was odd, this groom who seemed to be looking for an escape route. His eyes swept over the rows, passing over faces with a blank, unfocused quality until they reached her. And then they stopped. The connection was sudden and jarring. Marcus's eyes locked onto Maya's from across the crowded room. He squinted slightly, his brow furrowing in a mask of intense, disbelieving concentration. It was the look of a man trying to place a familiar face in a wildly unexpected context. Maya, knowing she had never seen him before in her life, assumed it was a simple case of mistaken identity. She offered a small, polite nod, a gesture intended to break the stare and release him from his confusion. But he didn't look away. His eyes remained fixed on her, the unfocused search now a laser-sharp, penetrating gaze. The polite nod went unreturned, and a prickle of unease traced its way down her spine. The ceremony continued around this strange, silent exchange. Victoria reached the altar, her face beaming, oblivious. The officiant began to speak, his voice a soothing, sonorous drone filling the grand space, but Maya could hardly hear him. All she was aware of was the unnerving weight of the groom's unwavering stare. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A photographer, part of the official wedding press pool, was being physically escorted out by security. His protests echoed through the ballroom. "I'm with the Times. You can't throw me out. This is a public interest story." Victoria's smile froze. Catherine rose from her seat, her face a mask of controlled fury. The whispers in the crowd intensified, guests pulling out their phones, filming the chaos. The photographer shouted one more time before being pushed through the doors. "Whitmore family discrimination. The black woman at table 47 was just called the help by your staff." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. All eyes turned to Maya. The blood drained from Victoria's face. Catherine's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing raw panic beneath. Daniel shot to his feet, his voice cutting through the chaos. "That's a lie. Maya is my guest, my partner, and anyone who—" But the damage was done. Phones were out everywhere now. Social media was already exploding. Within minutes, hashtags began trending. Whitmore wedding, Chiak wealth, and racism, Chatra black woman disrespected. Several high-profile guests, CEOs, politicians, celebrities, began quietly gathering their things and heading for the exits. A tech billionaire who'd invested heavily in Whitmore Industries stopped at Daniel's row. "I'm sorry, Dan, but I can't be associated with this. Call me when your family sorts out their values." One by one, the power players left. The exodus was silent but devastating. Victoria stood at the altar, tears streaming down her face, her perfect wedding crumbling in real time. Marcus remained frozen, his eyes still on Maya, but now with a look of dawning horror. Not at her, but at what was happening to her. Catherine rushed to the microphone, her voice shrill with desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please. This is a terrible misunderstanding. Our family would never—" "But you did." Maya's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She stood slowly, every eye in the room now on her. She walked down the aisle, not towards the exit, but towards the altar. Daniel moved to follow, but she raised a hand, stopping him. This was her moment. When she reached the front, she turned to face the crowd. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying the weight of 1,000 boardroom negotiations. "My name is Maya Okonkwo. 3 years ago, I was the CEO of Okonkwo Capital Management, one of the largest venture capital firms in North America." A ripple of recognition spread through the crowd. The Okonkwo name was legendary in finance circles, though Maya herself had been notoriously private, rarely photographed, never giving interviews. "I walked away from that world because of moments exactly like this," she continued, "because in that world, I was always the only black woman in the room, always the one who had to prove she belonged, always the one whose credentials were questioned, whose authority was challenged, whose very presence was treated as an anomaly to be explained away. Catherine tried to interrupt. "Miss Okonkwo, we never meant—" Maya's gaze silenced her. "You meant exactly what you said and did. From the moment I walked into your home, I was assessed and found wanting, not because of my character, my intelligence, or my accomplishments, but because of my skin and my refusal to perform wealth the way you demanded." She turned to Victoria. "You sent me links to expensive boutiques not to help, but to remind me that I didn't meet your standards. Your mother seated me apart from the family like I was contaminated. Your aunt called me exotic as if I were an object in a museum. And your staff, whether you instructed them or not, they called me the help." Victoria's face crumpled. I didn't know who you were." Maya's laugh was soft, bitter. "And that's exactly the problem. You thought it was acceptable to treat me that way because you assumed I had no power. You assumed I was nobody. But the truth is, even if I had been a waitress or a school teacher or an artist, I would have deserved your respect." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your family doesn't have a PR problem right now. You have a values problem, and no amount of money or social status can fix that." The ballroom was dead silent. Then, from the altar, movement. Marcus Chen stepped forward, away from his bride. He walked down the steps and approached Maya. When he reached her, he did something that shattered what remained of the ceremony's dignity. He bowed, not a casual nod, but a deep, formal bow of profound respect. When he straightened, his eyes were wet. "Ms. Okonkwo," he said, his voice shaking. "5 years ago, my startup was dying. I'd sent funding proposals to over 200 firms. Every single one rejected me, except one." He turned to address the crowd, his voice growing stronger. "Okonkwo Capital gave me my first major investment, not because of my connections, I had none. Not because of my pedigree, I'm a first-generation immigrant whose parents ran a laundromat, but because Ms. Okonkwo saw something in my work that everyone else missed." Tears streamed down his face now. "She saved my company. She saved my dream. Everything I have, this tuxedo, this wedding, my success, it exists because of her. And I just watched my future in-laws treat my greatest mentor like she was nothing." He turned back to Maya, his voice dropping to a whisper, meant only for her, but the room was so quiet that everyone heard. "I'm sorry, boss. I should have recognized you sooner. I should have stopped this." Maya's expression softened for the first time. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have nothing to apologize for, Marcus. You didn't cause this." Then, from the back of the ballroom, a new voice rang out. "But I might have prevented it." The crowd parted as an elderly man made his way forward, leaning on a carved wooden cane. Charles Whitmore, the family patriarch, Daniel's grandfather. The man who'd built the Whitmore empire from nothing. Catherine's face went white. "Father, you should be resting." "Be quiet, Catherine." His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. He walked until he stood directly in front of Maya. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his eyes sharp and assessing despite his age. Then his face transformed, a smile of genuine warmth breaking through. "Joseph Okonkwo's daughter," he said softly. "I should have known. You have his eyes." Maya's breath caught. "You knew my father?" "Knew him." Charles laughed, a sound rich with memory. "He saved my life." He turned to address the assembled guests, his voice carrying the authority of decades. 42 years ago, I was a young man trying to build a business in Lagos. I was naive, arrogant, and I made a deal with the wrong people. When the contract went south and those men came for me, with violence, not lawyers, it was Joseph Okonkwo who hid me, who negotiated my safety, who got me out of the country alive. He looked back at Maya, his eyes glistening. I owed your father a debt I could never repay. He died before I could even try, and now I find his daughter in my home, treated like garbage by my own family. The shame in his voice was palpable. Catherine found her voice, desperate now. Father, we didn't know. You didn't care to know. His cane struck the marble floor with a sharp crack. That's the problem, Catherine. You and Victoria, you've become so drunk on our family name that you've forgotten what it took to build it. Respect, humility, recognizing value regardless of packaging. He turned back to Maya. And this time, this powerful man who commanded rooms and bent industries to his will bowed his head. Miss Okonkwo, on behalf of my family, I offer you the apology you deserve, and I hope, though I have no right to ask, that you might tell me about your father. I've carried his memory for 4 decades. I'd like to know the man who raised the woman who clearly inherited his strength. Maya felt something crack open inside her chest, a dam she'd built 3 years ago suddenly failing. My father, she began, her voice thick with emotion, taught me that wealth without character is just decorated poverty. He taught me that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but how they treat those who have nothing to offer them. She looked around the ballroom at the faces watching her with newfound understanding, newfound shame. I left the world of high finance because I was tired of being the only one. Tired of code switching, of making myself smaller, of watching white mediocrity get promoted while black excellence got scrutinized. I was tired of rooms where I was the diversity statistic, where my presence was tolerated but never truly welcomed. Her voice dropped, becoming almost intimate despite the hundreds listening. I just wanted to be seen, really seen, not as a black CEO or a diversity win or an exotic curiosity, just as Maya, just as a woman who loves books and coffee and quiet mornings. Daniel gave me that. For 6 months, I got to just be Maya, and it was the most peaceful 6 months of my life. She turned to Daniel, who stood frozen, his face a landscape of emotions. I didn't tell you because I wanted to know if you could love Maya before you knew about Okonkwo Capital. I needed to know if what we had was real, and it was. It is. Daniel moved then, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He took her hands in his voice rough with emotion. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I didn't understand. I'm sorry I brought you into this. You have nothing to be sorry for, Maya said gently. You loved me when you thought I was nobody. That's everything. Charles Whitmore cleared his throat. Daniel, if you let this woman go, you're a fool. If you don't marry her, I'll disown you and adopt her instead. A shocked laugh rippled through the crowd, breaking some of the tension. But Charles wasn't finished. He turned to Catherine and Victoria, his face hardening. As for you two, Catherine, you're removed from the board of Whitmore Industries, effective immediately. Victoria, your trust fund is suspended for 1 year. You'll both spend that time volunteering with organizations that serve communities you've clearly learned nothing about. Father, you can't, Victoria began. I can. And I have. He turned to Marcus. Young man, you deserve better than this circus. If you want to call off this wedding, I'll personally fund whatever legal fees come from it, and you'll have my full support. Marcus looked at Victoria, at her tear-stained face and trembling hands. Then he looked at Maya. Miss Okonkwo, what would you do? Maya considered the question carefully. I'd ask myself, is the person I'm marrying someone who brings out the best in me? Someone who shares my values? Someone I can respect, not just love? Marcus nodded slowly. He turned to Victoria. I need time. I need to know if you understand why what happened today was wrong. Not because of who Maya is, but because of how you treated another human being. He removed his boutonniere, placed it gently on the altar, and walked out. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests rushed to leave, some to escape the scandal, others to position themselves for whatever fallout would come. Catherine collapsed into a chair, her perfect composure finally shattered. Victoria stood alone at the altar, her fairy tale wedding now a cautionary tale. Daniel squeezed Maya's hand. "Can we go? Please?" She nodded. Together they walked through the ruins of the ceremony, through the whispering guests and the flashing phones. As they reached the doors, Charles called out one more time. "Miss Okonkwo!" She turned back. "Your father would be proud of you, and if you ever want to talk about him, my door is open. You have family here, whether these fools recognize it or not." Maya's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak, and let Daniel lead her out into the cool evening air. They sat in the car for a long moment, the silence between them vast and complicated. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand if you can't forgive them. I understand if you can't forgive me for putting you through that." Maya turned to him, really looked at him. She saw his pain, his shame, his love. "I don't need to forgive you, Daniel. You didn't do anything wrong. You loved me. You defended me. You stood up to your family." She took his face in her hands. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't over. If we stay together, there will be more moments like this. More rooms where I'm the only one. More people who see my skin before they see me. Can you handle that? Can you stand beside me knowing that loving me means fighting battles you'll never fully understand?" Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to be in rooms that don't value you. I don't want to be part of a world that makes you feel less than. Maya, I'm not asking you to fight those battles alone. I'm asking you to let me learn. Let me listen. Let me stand with you." He pulled out his phone, and right there in the car, he did something Maya hadn't expected. He posted a statement to his social media. "Daniel Whitmore, heir to billions, with millions of followers. Today I watched the woman I love be disrespected by my own family. I watched them treat her with casual cruelty because they judged her by her appearance rather than her character. I'm ashamed, I'm heartbroken, and I'm done with silence. If you're in my life, family, friends, business associates, you will treat Maya with respect, or you won't be in my life. Period. No more excuses. No more, that's just how things are. Love demands better. I demand better." He posted it without hesitation, then turned off his phone. "Whatever consequences come from that, I'll handle them. But I won't have anyone think I'm okay with what happened today." Maya felt something shift inside her, a wall she'd been holding up finally lowering. "Take me to the bookstore," she said softly. "What?" "Our bookstore, where we met. Take me there." Daniel started the car. They drove through the city in comfortable silence, the chaos of the wedding falling away with each mile. When they pulled up in front of the small bookstore, its lights were off, the closed sign hanging in the window. Daniel started to say they could come back tomorrow, but Maya was already getting out of the car. She tried the door. Locked. She knocked. After a moment, the owner, Mr. Peterson, appeared, looking confused. When he saw Maya, his face broke into a warm smile. "Maya, what are you doing here so late, and so dressed up? Can we come in, Mr. P, just for a little while?" He looked at her face, saw something there that made him nod immediately. He unlocked the door and ushered them inside. "Stay as long as you need. I'll be in the back doing inventory." Maya led Daniel to their corner, the worn armchairs by the window where they'd first talked, where they'd fallen in love. She kicked off her heels, curled into her chair, and finally, let herself breathe. Daniel sat across from her, watching her come back to herself. "This is where I'm real," Maya said quietly. "Not at galas or boardrooms or weddings. Here, in places like this, with books and coffee and no pretense. Can you love me here, Daniel? In the small, quiet moments? Because this is who I am." Daniel leaned forward, taking her hands. "Maya, I fell in love with you here, Every moment we've had in this bookstore, every conversation, every comfortable silence, that's what I want. Not the empire you walked away from, not the power or prestige, just you. Just this. Maya felt tears slip down her cheeks for the first time that night. Your family is going to hate me forever. Then they're not my family. You are. They sat there in the bookstore until dawn broke, talking about everything and nothing, about fathers and legacies, about the weight of names and the freedom of anonymity, about what it means to be seen and what it costs to be invisible. When the sun finally rose, painting the bookstore in soft gold light, Maya rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. "I'm tired of running," she whispered. "I'm tired of hiding, but I'm also tired of fighting." "Then don't," Daniel said. "Don't run, don't hide, don't fight. Just live, just be, and I'll be right here beside you, learning, listening, loving you exactly as you are." Mr. Peterson emerged from the back with 2 cups of fresh coffee. He set them down on the small table between the chairs, gave Maya's shoulder a gentle squeeze, and disappeared again without a word. Maya picked up her cup, breathed in the familiar smell, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope that the world would change overnight. Not hope that there wouldn't be more Catherines and Victorias. But hope that she could face them without losing herself. Hope that she'd found someone who saw her, really saw her, and loved what he found. "So what happens now?" Daniel asked. Maya smiled, a real smile, the first of the night. "Now we drink our coffee. We read our books. We live our quiet life. And when the world demands we show up and fight, we'll fight. Together." "Together," Daniel echoed. And in that moment, in a closed bookstore, as the city woke around them, surrounded by thousands of stories of love and loss and triumph and tragedy, they wrote the beginning of their own. Not a fairy tale where love conquers all, but something better. A real story, where love gives you the courage to face all that can't be conquered and the grace to find peace in the spaces between battles. Because dignity doesn't always win, but it always matters. And sometimes, that's enough.